Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, fantasy fiction fans. So, today I want to talk about the staleness of the Dark Lord trope, and I want to explain why I think you should use the banality of evil to create your demon king in your next fantasy fiction project. Now, the jury is still out on whether you should use a Dark Lord archetype in your fantasy fiction. The argument is, well, if it's good enough for Tolkien and it's good enough for Rowling, then it should be suitable for me. But that has never been an acceptable reason to imitate someone else's artistry, has it? Why copycat their undoubted ingenuity when there is a better way to portray your supervillain? And I want to explain how. It's by using the banality of evil. Now, it's an interesting concept, and it goes something like this. Are you ready? Archetypal antagonists, and I'm talking here about the Dark Lord, the Prince of Darkness, your Darth Vaders, your Lord Voldemorts, are not actually true fanatical sociopaths, but are, in fact, extremely average and probably even mundane persons of low to average intellect, who rely on cliched responses instead of thinking for themselves, and they are motivated by simply getting ahead, by promoting themselves beyond their own limitations so that they can earn more cash and they can live a more relaxed lifestyle. And that's instead of following any wicked or perverse ideology. These guys really do believe that success relies on them earning a little more cash so they feel comfortable in their downtime. Everything that they may do is motivated by this simple selfishness, although it might be interpreted by outsiders and by their circle of sycophants as good for society. But it's not designed to be good for society. It's just designed to give them more cash and live a more relaxed lifestyle. So in the banality of evil theory, demon kings and dark lords are actually motivated by complacency, not by some ideology. They are totally unexceptional. They are not cunning. They are not shrewd. They are not devious, they are not conscientious, and they are certainly not talented. They are totally nondescript. Now, in the Wizard of Oz story, the wizard created by author L. Frank Baum, who is known, by the way, as Oz the Great and Terrible, is actually quite a pathetic con man, and he uses his magic tricks and his ridiculous props to make himself look big and powerful. So a banal Dark Lord might be described as a villain of Oz, especially if you're using the banality of evil theory, because your villain of Oz will be clumsy, unworthy, woefully inept, and a second-class individual who somehow becomes the supreme ruler of the realm through nothing more than a little underhanded magic, sloppy showmanship, a good proportion of luck, and some spare change in his pocket. But how did the villain of Oz character gain power and influence? How did he come to rule an entire realm and come to inhabit a darker side if he's so pathetic? Well, the banality of evil theory does answer these questions because it recognises that there is potential in all of us. We can all make the world a better place to live in. We might all achieve greatness. So when Oscar Diggs, which is the real name of the Wizard of Oz, by the way, finds himself stranded in a magical country after his promotional balloon failed and crashed, he used the few tricks and little deceits that he had at his disposal to survive in the world that he'd dropped into. Now, he did not expect that the surrounding people would adore him, but since he'd always been self-centred, though he was always too unprincipled and lazy to be truly ambitious, when he saw that the opportunity to surpass his own limitations came without effort, he accepted what was offered by the people with both hands. The worst thing that could actually be said about the Wizard of Oz is that he became eventually grubby and indulgent. At heart, he remained the seedy con artist that he had always been. So, when Dorothy met him, she was unimpressed, she was disappointed, and she was even disillusioned. And when he put on a big show to impress and scare her, of course, it backfired, because he's a pathetic character. And this is the banality of evil. So I think you should give your Dark Lord a list of flaws. But I also recommend that you go further than that and you use the banality of evil concept to create your bad of bads. And here is why I think you should go down this route. Point 1. There is a moral sense of conscience in all of us, unless that person has a mental disorder, and I'll talk about that shortly. So the Villain of Oz character tries his best to be good, but his lack of intelligence and his ineptitude gets in the way of his best intentions. Number 2, arrogance and lack of remorse are often used defensively by these types. So the Oz dudes don't mean to harm anybody by what they say or how they act because they're just protecting themselves. They don't see the harm they do. Number 3, their temper fits are often caused by the frustration caused by their own shortcomings. Point 4, these Oz guys are often promoted beyond their limited abilities, so they become prone to substance abuse and narcotic addiction. And of course this doesn't help with the consistency or the coherence of their message. Number 5, their emotional ties are weak and they will also have bad interpersonal relationships. They often make friendships that are based on manipulation and exploitation rather than strong bonds and genuine love. And next, they are generally spineless and they're generally cowardly, but they hide these negative traits under bluster and ostentation. And next, they dislike virtuosity and intellect because it casts them in poor light. Thus, they will minimise the efforts of experts and intellectuals to big themselves up. And finally, relationships with family members and relatives are often strained because those close to the Oz people know the truth about their many limitations and their shortcomings. And so for these reasons, the Oz types often exclude themselves from the family group or exclude themselves from the inner circle of decision makers. And consequently, this makes them feel excluded and persecuted, even though it's their own stupid fault, because they excluded themselves, and they therefore afterwards moan about that exclusion. Now, I think it is better to go down the Villain of Oz route when you develop your antagonist, rather than turning your Dark Lord into a true psychopath. Why? Because true psychopaths cannot function in society. That's why they're most often locked up. They cannot function in society. While your Villain of Oz character, he gets away with it, and he even climbs to the top of the tree, even though he is limited by his own negative traits. So true psychopaths differ from Oz characters because true psychopaths are, first and foremost, fearless they have a high tolerance for stress, and this means they will doubtless succumb before their time. And true psychopaths have poor impulse control, so their lack of foresight means that they will take outrageous risks, and therefore they are likely to die sooner. And true psychopaths have this poor impulse control, and that means they will get addicted to substances rapidly. And because they lack foresight and fearlessness, they will get addicted early to the most deadly narcotics. And true psychopaths have a desire for immediate gratification, so quick fixes are common. It means they are unable to establish close interpersonal relationships because they just want immediate gratification. And true psychopaths don't have empathy, so they will seem to be mean and cruel to those that are closest to them. Now, this means that they are likely to be overthrown or killed by their closest allies and even their loved ones. If they acknowledge this, and it will probably be too late anyway because their lack of foresight means they won't recognise the signs, but if they do acknowledge that they might be overthrown by their closest allies, it will cause them to act capriciously and wickedly and will make them seem highly unpredictable. And true psychopaths cannot use violence as an instrument because they lack foresight and they have poor impulse control. This means they can only indulge in cruel violence to gain immediate gratification for themselves. But they cannot use violence in any strategic or methodological way. So, contrary to popular opinion, by the way, true psychopaths don't make efficient serial killers. And true psychopaths have no place in crime syndicates. Now, although psychopaths are often associated in our minds with organised crime and economic crime and war crime, true psychopaths would be of little or even no usefulness in any of these scenarios. Their poor impulse control, their lack of foresight, and their dependence on narcotics means they would find no place in any highly sophisticated criminal enterprise. They would never achieve greatness in these scenarios and would probably never get promoted beyond the rank of enforcer or the despot's own knucklehead torturer. So think hard about creating your Dark Lord. Think hard about creating a Prince of Darkness trope. And please, I beg you, don't go down the stereotypical and the frankly cartoonish two-dimensional Dick Dastardly route. You know, he's bad because he's bad. He was born bad and so he's bad. Instead, think about the banality of evil. So good luck with your writing. Please let me know how you get on and tweet me with your thoughts and ideas at Neilmach, Neilmach, all one word. Good luck.